7 or 8 minutes.
So. So did that pop up?
Not yet. Everything went blank. I've got a dark screen.
No. Anything yet?
No.
Oh, okay. How about there?
That's it. It's up.
All right. Well, you know, third time's a charm, right?
Well, and I'm seeing the red dot in the upper left corner. Does that mean it's recording?
I believe it is, yes.
Well, can I see that you're recording?
I don't know. I guess I'm.
Oh, yes,
Red.
I've got the scroll. Recording has started. So I think we're set, Dan.
Okay. We'll just have Jason cut out this first 10 minutes, so.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. The participation number in the lower left part of my screen has stopped increasing. So, oh, there it goes again. Come to the afternoon session of the Economic Development Authority application workshop. My name is Joe Bulkey, and I will start off the session. Dan Narber is also actually will be driving the PowerPoint for the first section of this, and then he will a little bit later take over and summarize the community facilities and the LMI portion of the program. As mentioned earlier, please everybody mute your line, and knowing and understanding that you can raise your hand or go ahead and type your questions in as necessary. And between Dan and I think we'll try to hit everybody's questions as we need. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the EDA website at a later date. Okay. You saw this number this morning. Again, we've I guess verbally heard what our allocation is going to be this year. We don't have that in writing yet. We hope to get that about summertime. However, for water sewer, which is the subject of this session, we are going to be able to make some awards with this quarter's money currently under review now.
Oops. Sorry.
Nope, you're good. Again, the national objective is one of three criteria. LMI, slum and blight, urgent need, water sewers are typically LMI. And the eligible applicants, again, are the non-entitlements, cities and counties throughout the state. The funding ceilings, again, for all of the projects are essentially 0 to 299 population are eligible for $1,000 per person. And then populations of 300 up to 999 can get the 300,000 max. And then it increases based on population from there. Eligible activities, big picture, we do essentially any water sewer project involving collection, treatment, storage, and we also include well repair and new wells in that. And then we also fund separation projects as needed. The application cycle is quarterly. That application workshop date is incorrect, but the applications are quarterly, again, 11:59 p.m. on those dates indicated there. We try to have announcements ready in about 70 days from those dates. We make awards, and then as needed, if something needs to be resubmitted, then you've got typically a 12 or 15 or maybe 20-day window to resubmit if necessary. So we hope to make announcements here, in a couple of weeks for this current round of water sewer awards. It's important to understand that there are some requirements for water sewer applications. They're listed below here. If you need a DNR permit, we do need to see the letters from the DNR that the facility plan or the preliminary engineering report is submitted and accepted. And then we also need to see committed and documented commitments of either the DNR SRF funds via the being placed on the approved intended use plan. I need to mention sometimes we see applicants upload the just a letter indicating that they've submitted the application for the IUP, but you actually have to be on the approved list. And it's best to take a screenshot or capture the spreadsheet off of that IUP and just upload that into Iowa Grants for us to take a look at. That's the quickest and easiest for us to be able to verify that. And then if you've got USDA funds, the letter of conditions must be submitted. And that's typically a fairly long letter. I mean, it can be 15 or 16 or 17 pages, but please upload the whole thing. Important, again, if these required attachments are not submitted with the application, we will not review the application. The most competitive applications will also have additional documents. That would be a completed environmental review and final engineering, the final design complete or at a minimum underway. And if you need assistance with procuring that engineer and learning about those differences between preliminary and final design and construction admin, please give me a call for any procurement questions you might have. And again, this activity, soliciting or procuring the engineer, needs to be on the front end of the application. So long before you submit an application for a water sewer. And then if awarded, we would be able to reimburse some of those activities. Also, we'd like to see on the competitive applications a screenshot of the floodplain maps. We're seeing that most of the time, all of the time. And again, that helps. And you probably already got it because you've already initiated the environmental review, and you're already partway down that road at a minimum. So go ahead and upload the floodplain maps also.
And can I jump in here, Joe, really quick?
Yes, please.
Just in regard to this part too, just to make sure that, what we're mainly looking at is that regulatory floodway, that pink and blue hashed area, because we basically, with fairly recent HUD guidance, and we aren't able to actually do projects within a regulated floodway, and so that's why we need to have that information to make sure that we aren't in that at all, because that will definitely kick a project out of the process. So
Good point. So again, some of the key points of an application. We'll go over these just very briefly. Keep these in mind when you're assembling the application. We look at the need for a project. If you've got a DNR, if the city has a DNR violation for one reason or another, please include that. That helps a lot for a review of the need of the project. We look at the indicated timely start and completion of a project. We like to see realistic time frames as far as when final design can be completed, estimated construction dates, bidding and construction dates, and then the big picture timetable. We need to see that the local funds are leveraged and what percent of that leveraging is included, whether it's bonding or SRF or USDA or some city funds. We need to see we'll be able to calculate the cost per beneficiary. We look at we refer to the engineering reports on what kind of alternate projects were reviewed and verify that essentially we agree that the city is proceeding with the best recommendation. And then we look at the affordability to the city, what the existing water and sewer rates are, perhaps when they last did have to increase those. Take a look at what kind of leveraging is being used. And then again, very important, we look at the readiness to proceed. And again, it's a realistic estimate of when final design can be done. Verify that the local funds are secured. The capacity of the recipient to be able to raise fees a little bit. And then we also, part of this, we also look at verifying that acquisition is at least underway, or at a minimum that options have been secured for the acquisition of property. And we'd like to see those, even if they're only easements, we'd like to see that there's been some discussions and perhaps an option. And it looks like we've got a question. The question is, the administrator thought development could occur in the floodplain in specific examples, such as water mains under a stream. And I think you're correct there. If some deep boring is going under a stream, I think that's typically something that's allowed. I think if you're doing some piping that follows an existing bridge, perhaps a situation like this, I don't know that I could come up with all of the current rules for this. I think those are a couple examples where work has been allowed to proceed technically within the floodway. Dan, can you think of anything else that we've uh, other than boring under or following the bridge of across a river?
No, I think that's basically
That's about
the two
it.
examples. And I think from back when this first came out and Leslie had provided information, I think those were primarily the two instances where that could occur. So you're not in any way altering or changing that anything within that floodway. I mean, it is just the floodway portion, not the floodplain. I mean, there's certainly things that can be done within that as long as it's meets certain requirements, but the regulated floodway is where we have the big issue. But those two examples that Joe mentioned, I think are basically what we are aware can take place. And I guess the best thing is if you have something like that, it might be good to contact us. We can either talk with Ed or whoever our new environmental person will be, just to make sure that we are everyone's on the same page and we have the right information so that we're not going through an application process and then finding out that it's not eligible to be completed. So
Okay, good. Some additional readiness requirements. Uh, Again, we want the procurement of the engineer to be done prior to application. Uh, Unless, of course, and I think we're seeing more that are going down the road of having the city either utilize SRF funding or however pay for the entire engineering contract. They're already doing preliminary design, but have the city or SRF also then do final design and even the construction inspection part of that. If that is entirely on the city, then of course you don't need to do that procurement. Again, we need to see the in writing, the funding commitments from DNR and or the USDA. If you do, uh, and if you do upload a facility plan or a preliminary engineering report for water, we like to see the signed version of that, and also, of course, then the approval letter for those reports from the DNR. We like to see the environmental as far along as possible, without harming the process from your end at all. And then we like to see the final design at a minimum underway or completed. And if it's underway, we appreciate a realistic estimate of when you think that could be done. So what is looked at in the review, and these are all scored on criteria of 1 through 5. And I won't go into too much detail on these, but again, the magnitude or the need for the project, that it's properly documented or demonstrated, the estimated completion in a realistic, timely manner, the leveraging issue with other funds, and those are all based on percentages, and you can follow right along with that in the application on how many. I mean, many of these you already have a very good idea, if not precisely know how many points you're going to get on the application. The cost per beneficiary is fairly well defined, and then the impact on the need and quality of life of the residents. So the impact of the project. And again, a lot of that is out of the based on the engineering reports that are completed. The readiness to proceed, again, with an emphasis on the acquisition portion that is demonstrated. The capacity to operate and maintain the project, what kind of staff are already employed by the city that can, I mean, if you're greatly increasing a wastewater treatment plant, have you got does the city have adequate staff that's properly certified to be able to do this new process? And then the Lmi benefit is also fairly well, you know that on the front end, how many points that is worth. And I think with that, I'll let Dan delve into the community facilities portion.
All right. Thanks, Joe. And if you have some questions, Joe, I don't know if you can kind of track those. I'm not able to see those with the screen up sharing, so just kind of watch those as they come in. But we'll go into the Community Facilities and Services Fund application process. Basically the funding ceilings, as Joe mentioned, everything's the same based on our rules as far as what application or what applicants are eligible to apply for. So you see those again there. The eligible activities, mostly, I guess these are the types of projects that we generally see: child care centers, any facilities for persons with physical, mentally challenged, additions to current existing facilities, things like that. Senior centers are eligible, and then homeless shelter, transitional type housing, providing that activity is eligible under the Community Facilities and Services Fund. The application cycle basically kind of starts, with our workshop today. It is an open window process. We switched over to that last year, and again, I think we've kind of talked about that. And Nicole mentioned that in her presentation this morning. But the process is open window. Applications are reviewed. As they're submitted, they're time date stamped, and so we'll review them in that order. Currently, we've obligated all of our funds, and so we're not looking at applications yet. And once we get that allocation funding commitment from HUD, as Joe mentioned earlier, and Nicole too, sometime possibly July, we'll be able to start reviewing applications to make awards, once we have that. So, and again, the awards, we'll just continue reviewing those as they are submitted, and once all funds are obligated, we won't then be accepting any additional applications. And I think, as Nicole mentioned too, that planning to have a report available that kind of indicates what amount of funds are left in there, so you have an idea of whether or not you would be able to make an application. So. Some of the main requirements for community facilities and services. Again, the site control acquisition issues, we've seen those over the years, kind of creating problems and time delays with projects after they've been funded. And so we've kind of changed how we look at that now. And basically with the application, we have to have site control demonstrated, either with an option to purchase on whatever parcel you may need or be looking at, or building, if that's the case, or you can have outright ownership of that already. But all of that, should have been done or should be done prior to application submittal. Keep in mind that once you start the application process and submit that, you cannot go, you can't go through an acquisition process and actually acquire and finalize things, because that would then jeopardize the project. But you can get an option to buy and then just kind of hold tight until you would know whether or not you're funded, and then can proceed after that. Local match, get committed and documented. This is newer as well, and I think because of the process being open window and giving the opportunity to submit applications when you're ready and not having to wait for a specific deadline, and then if it's not funded, wait another full year. We want to see that the local match is committed for these projects, and that's documented in the application, so that we know that if the project is fundable, that it will be ready to move ahead right away, and that there isn't, a delay in having to fundraise or find out if other grant applications or whatever the case may be for the local, that we're not having to wait 6 months or so to see if something else will be approved for the project. So as with some of the other presentations that have mentioned, the application requirements, the documentation, having to be submitted with the application. And without that, we can't review it because again, we won't be going back to ask for additional information if it's not provided.
Dan,
Yes.
we got a question. If an option was secured for a purchase, does URA then apply after the award? I think there's some processes of that URA process, or that process to get to an option. I think some of those have to occur before you even get to a signed option.
Right. Yeah. And you
Notification type things, and
yeah. And the actual, I mean, if the acquisition process has to follow URA, so unless you've actually purchased and have a site already under control ownership prior to application, you're pretty much going to have to follow the URA guidelines, because the intent, I guess, is that then becomes part of the project, and the costs related to that. And so, all those things would be subject to all the federal requirements.
we got a question, Dan. What is the match requirement?
The match requirement for community facilities, there is no specific match requirement. I'll touch a little bit on that here in the application review information here in a little bit, but there is no specific required amount. Obviously we want to see that we're kind of the last dollar in, and what's needed to make the project work. The pot of money for community facilities is very small. We may have, I don't know if we've ever had over $2 million in that pot, in the last several rounds of community facilities. And so there isn't a lot of money there to begin with. And so, we want to be able to spread that out as much as we can. So the more you can provide, the better. And, but again, there's no specific required amount. It then, I guess, falls back on the applicant to demonstrate the financial need, for a project. Any other questions?
Not yet.
Okay. I'll just keep plugging away and you can interrupt me as we go. Similar to the water sewer, again, these things are helping to show readiness to proceed, just to give that, little extra leg up, I guess, in the process, so that we know things are moving ahead. Not required, though. The environmental review complete. And again, I think Ed had mentioned in one of the earlier sessions this morning, I think with housing, that you can do the environmental process and have things ready. You just can't publish anything and do any of that prior to notification of an award, because until there's an actual award, it's not really considered, like a federal undertaking, and therefore, if you had done it, you'd have to, I think, redo it. So basically, it's just getting through that process so that it's ready, to publish and do everything at the point you can move ahead. So final architectural plans completed or underway. That may not always be possible. And again, it's not, a lot of the preliminary work, even sometimes those things can change a lot depending on, the projects and buildings and things like that. It's a little more difficult with these projects to get to a final point, compared to like water and sewer, but it does give you a little bit more advantage if you have those things underway or completed. So All right, so some of the key points, again, these are very similar to what Joe's already mentioned for water and sewer, but documenting need for the project, the timely start and completion, being realistic with construction start dates and the timetables to complete that. It really, our contract periods are 3 years, and so again, we're hoping that when you put a project together, that things are going to happen and get done within that time, and but we still want you to be realistic in the schedule that you put forward. And because occasionally we run into problems even now with a 3-year time period where things come up and they may be unforeseen, and we have to adjust with those. But we just want to make sure that the construction schedules and timelines are realistic, so that we know that the project's going to get done in a timely manner. The leveraging of local funds, again, this is making sure that those are committed and secured. That percentage, with the open window process, we're more not necessarily looking at scoring as we do with water and sewer, but making sure that all the pieces are there and meeting our scoring or our review criteria. But obviously the more local money you have, that will help to show that there's local commitment and that the project is can move ahead, and that the CDBG investment will be basically the amount needed to make that project work. The cost per beneficiary, we try to keep that for community facilities projects. It's you may be serving less or fewer individuals as part of a project, and so that at $10,000 per beneficiary, that's kind of the high end. You get the lower, the lower that is, the better. But again, we understand that sometimes if the project is only serving a few individuals, if you're adding, say, 10 or 12 beds, for instance, like an Alzheimer's unit or something like that, that could be a little bit higher. But again, that's kind of the threshold that we've established, and that's been in place for years. So capacity to operate, just making sure that the entity that's operating the facility, that there's some track record there of, how long they've been, in business, or how long they've been set up as a nonprofit and operating, just, just so that we know that if the project is funded, that it is something that can be accomplished, and that entity has the ability to make the project work. Kind of local funds, again, I think I referenced that a little bit ago with the percentage of funds, but making sure these are committed and secured so that we know that the project can move ahead. The site control issue, making sure that there is at least an option to purchase if the land isn't already under control. The readiness to proceed with procurement of architects, making sure that that's all done. These are all things that help show that your project is ready to go and can be completed. And when we're reviewing these, we just want to make sure that if we do fund a project, that we know it's going to get started and completed within that 3-year time period. Some projects may require a survey at the end of a project if they're funded, and basically we just need to be able to document that we're still meeting the national objective after the project's complete. For instance, child care is where you may have a group of individuals there at the time of the application, but 3 years later, when your project is completed, or even 2 years if the construction process is done, you may be serving a different group of individuals at that time, and so we still have to then survey those at that point at the end of the project to ensure that we're still meeting that national objective. Because if that falls below that 51% threshold, the activity is not eligible under the program, and we could be looking at having to have a repayment of funds. We haven't ever had to do that, but we just want to make sure that that you're aware of that as you proceed with applications. The readiness to proceed. Kind of talked about this a little bit already too, with the environmental, having that completed or as far along as you can, and architectural plans completed or underway. I guess the biggest change, and Nicole talked about this a little bit this morning, but if the Green Streets criteria are now considered optional as part of the application process. However, if you are planning to follow those, or if there's things that your projects really want to do, I mean, um, it's okay to still do those, but if you are doing that, part of that readiness to proceed and showing that the project can move ahead will be having the design consultation in place or done before the application is submitted. And that's usually done, there's no cost to that, and just would need to contact Jeff Geertz to set that up and get that process underway. But again, if the project is using the Green Streets criteria, that design consultation would have to be completed and shown in the application. All right, so the review criteria, as I mentioned earlier, again, these are very similar to what the Water and Sewer Fund criteria is with the magnitude of need. Obviously, we want to be able to show that what the need is for the project, and why the funds are being requested, completion in a timely manner, leveraging of local funds, cost per beneficiary. And these are all in our review sheets. You probably have seen these before. I know we've made these available in previous workshops, but the degree of impact, I mean, that's another big important one. How is the project and what you're proposing going to help eliminate or to alleviate the problem that's mentioned or addressed in the need, making sure that that what you're doing is a good solution, and will have a major impact, especially on the low and moderate income individuals that we're trying to benefit as part of the program. The readiness to proceed, we look at that again to make sure that a project, if it's funded, can be started and completed in a timely manner. Documenting all of those things with acquisition and plans and architects and all those types of things. The more that you have done, or the further along in that process, that just helps us see that the project will move ahead quickly. Capacity to operate and maintain the proposed project. This kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier with the entity, the nonprofit who may be the subrecipient of the funds, the ability to make sure that they can complete the project and will be able to maintain it once it is completed. The Lmi Benefit, and this is just obviously a big requirement for the CDBG program. And after we get through the application process here, I'll go through the LMI documentation and survey process. But that is an important part that we look at as part of our review. And the Green Streets, again, that being optional now. But if it is in there, there are certain things in the application that have been changed, and the next few slides will kind of talk about that, or at least show you what we're looking at as we move forward with the Green Streets criteria, if you're choosing to do that.
And Dan, Jeff just made a note. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I just made the comment that if project decides to pursue the Green Streets criteria, that there's the possibility for additional funding to meet some of the criterion that may add cost to a project. So if cost is what scares you away from the Green Streets criteria, keep that in mind and don't necessarily let it scare you away from following the Green Streets criteria.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And that's kind of a good segue into these next few slides. So this actually, when you are doing your applications, rather than putting all of the, if you are doing green streets, criteria, it used to be included in the required attachments at the end of the application. Now, when you're in the application form, there is actually a separate area that you will have to complete. Whether or not you're doing green streets, you still have to go in and either say yes or no, and then mark this complete, because you won't be able to submit the application without that. But it's a separate component now here in the application forms that you'll complete as part of the process. So this next slide, when you click on that and go to edit, this is what you'll see. And up in the instructions, as Jeff mentioned, you'll note that the green streets criteria can add costs to the project, and there are certain things that we have decided if you're planning to implement those types of things, you can receive additional funding for that. It would be separate from what your regular CDBG award is. And so I think, as the instructions state, it can be up to 10% of the CDBG request amount, depending on what you choose to do. And so first you will check, as I mentioned, the green streets criteria, if additional funds are being requested, yes or no. If no, I mean, that's basically it. You just mark the form complete and you can move on. If it's yes, then we want to know when that consultation was held. And then following that, I've only got a screenshot here of just the first one. Under the integrative design, there are certain activities that have been determined to add more cost. And so, for instance, if you're planning to implement 1.6 as part of your project, you would fill that out and say yes, and kind of fill out the detail there, just as you would if you were looking at the Green Streets checklist that you were normally completing. So this is what you'll see when you are in the application. Again, if you are looking at following green streets and making that part of your project.
Jeff, are you seeing, this is Joe, are you seeing the chat language there? Brad's got a question for you. And maybe you guys can do that, can go back and forth outside of this PowerPoint here. Does that work?
I just sent a reply.
Okay. All right, Dan.
Okay. No, that's fine. Like I said, I don't see the comments, but if you can address those, that's great. And then this is just the last screenshot I have in the application, which is down below, that last screen. When you get down to the end of all the activities that you may be looking at adding, here are the supporting documents, again, that normally would have been at the end of the application as required documents. We do have to make sure that, if you're doing anything, that these actually are included here, again, to show that what you're planning to do, the intent to comply, assurances that they'll be completed, because if you're asking for additional funds to do these things, the only way that works is if we have all the supporting documentation and assurances that they're done, and that the actual improvements were completed, to then, I guess, be able to request that additional money for that. So, but here's where the normal attachments that you're used to seeing at the end of the application would be uploaded. And again, if you're looking at doing that, please contact Jeff to set up a consultation so that can be started and completed as part of the application. And I think that takes care of most of the community facilities. This last slide is just kind of the general information that's required as part of the CDBG Water, Sewer, and Community Facilities program. Nicole, I think, addressed a lot of these in her morning session with the federal requirements, the assurances, disclosure statements, public hearing information. All of those things have to be part of the application. And again, if things are not there that are required, the application will not be reviewed. So, and we've had that happen, and so we just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that. And before you hit that final submit button, make sure you go back and check to make sure that attachments are what they say they are or supposed to be, because we don't want to have to turn down applications, but if they aren't complete, that's what we have to do. So, any other questions on the overall application process? I know we're.
I do have one, Dan.
Okay.
Does the needs assessment need to be part of the public hearing? Well, it needs its own public hearing. Otherwise, you can just do it as part of the application public hearing. Correct?
Yes, that's correct. You can do it either way. I mean, if I guess I've seen it done both ways, where it's done as a separate hearing. It may be done at the same meeting as the application hearing, or
Yep.
you can do it in one hearing as long as the notice, references that you're doing an application hearing, and also, that the hearing is to develop, the community development housing needs assessment. So it can be done either way, but it does have to be done at a public hearing, as we had provided, in that the training last year, and I think that's available online. But it has to be part of a public hearing process and not just done at a regular city council meeting or board of supervisors meeting. The intent is to make sure that it's kind of a workable plan for the community, and that you're getting input from the general public as part of that process. So, but it does have to be done at a public hearing. One thing I'll mention, it does. They're only good for a 1-year time period, and so at the end of that year, if you're applying for funds again, you do have to have another hearing to at least, maybe nothing's changed, but you have to have a public hearing to at least readdress that, reevaluate, and adopt it, for the next application that you're submitting, if it's outside that 1-year period. I think it used to be that we kind of had a 3-year time period in there, but that's changed, and now it's just 1 year.
And a couple more questions. There's a part 2 to that. And I think it deals with the timing of the public hearing and the application submittal. In the past, we have allowed, sometimes that's a quick turnaround, and we have allowed unsigned minutes to be uploaded up with the application of the public hearing, but then later they have to provide the signed minutes for the application. Correct?
Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
it's something that I think a lot of our programs are now looking to make sure that we have the signed minutes. And again, it's sometimes hard to get those
Right.
right away after a public hearing, unless you're doing them a month ahead of the application submittal. But if they do get up against that timeline, we can accept those, but then we would want to have signed copies as well. So.
Well, and then another part to that, and I think it's correct, you have 1 year from the date of the public hearing to submit the application before you have to redo the public hearing.
Correct.
1 year from the date of the public
Yeah.
hearing. Yes.
So
Okay.
if you do an application, for July 1st, and you say you hold the public hearing middle of June, and then, you don't apply, or it doesn't fund it, and you decide not to reapply, or the city doesn't until, another later date, as long as they've, apply within the time period up to that middle of June date, with one of the subsequent quarters, or, whatever it is, they can use that same public hearing information. But if it passes that, they would have to then redo the public hearing. So.
Also, Dan, a question about 10% additional for green streets. So if you're applying for 300,000, you could essentially now apply for 330,000, including the 30,000 toward the green streets.
Well, yeah, I guess the application itself will still be, the normal application. Let me back up here and see if I can find that, because you won't put that in your budget.
Separate application, actually.
Yeah. And I think, let's see, I don't have that on here. As part of this, there's going to be a screen in here where you would actually put the amount that you're intending to apply for within this Green Streets component piece. So that's where the additional part would go. Don't put it in your initial or overall project budget up front. Does that make sense?
HUD limits us to the $300,000 number, but separately, we'd look at the Green Streets component as a separate application, separate contract.
Right.
So it's really going to end up with two contracts on a project like that. But essentially, it would be for $330,000, Diana. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I'll kind of go through the LMI process quickly. We may run over our time limit, unless if you have to jump off, great. If you're planning to attend a different session, I'll try to get through this as quickly as I can.
And for those, Dan, for those that do want to jump into the DTR one, you have to log out of this one and then separately into the next DTR session.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And if you do have to do that, this will be available as, because we are recording it, it'll be available on our website probably within the next several days. So, and if you ever have questions about any of it, you can certainly give me a call. I'd be glad to talk to you too. So, all right. So basically, with the LMI, that is one of the major national objectives that we fund all of our projects with, other than, say, downtown revitalization, where we're looking at slum and blight, some urgent need projects, although those are fewer now that we have a quarterly process. But occasionally, we may have something that just completely comes up out of the blue and unforeseen, and we can fund a project using the urgent need national objective. But primarily looking at low and moderate income benefit. The remainder of the presentation will discuss that. There are different types of benefit. When you're looking at community facilities, most of the time, we could be looking at a limited clientele where you're benefiting a specific group of people. There are certain classes of individuals or groups that are defined in the HUD CDBG regs that if it's an activity that benefits specifically that group, they're considered 51% LMI without conducting any kind of income survey or doing anything further. So if that's the case, you would meet limited clientele at 51%, and that's all that you'd have to do. The other types of benefit or area benefit can either be a targeted project area within a community, or it can be the entire community project that's benefiting the whole community, if it's a new well or treatment improvements or things like that benefit everyone. The limited clientele, here are the defined groups under the regulations that I mentioned. So, if your project is specifically set up to benefit one of these groups, you would meet the LMI criteria without doing anything further. We just, we need to make sure of that. So if you have a project and have questions, be sure to contact me or another project manager, just so we make sure that we are meeting that limited clientele benefit, so that we know that that's the case, and make sure if you submit an application, that there wasn't, something further that needed to be done with survey or anything like that. Again, the limited clientele is presumed to be 51%. So if you are using that, that's really all we have to do, because that's the main threshold. The other way of a couple of ways of determining LMI benefit would be using the HUD ACS data, the American Community Survey data. This is posted on our website. Currently under the 2011 to 2015 data that they provided. I'm not sure when that will change. We generally get a notice from HUD that that's being updated, and then we'll post that as it's available. The other way then to document LMI, if you're not using one of those first two items, would be to do an income survey. And that whole process of conducting an income survey can be found on our website, or the link here provides the conducting an income survey packet. I mean, it talks through the process, so it gives you all the explanation of what needs to be done there. So for community facilities, surveys are good for a 3-year period, well, for water sewer as well. But so any community facility application submitted, in 2021, you can have documentation of LMI from 2019, 2020, or the current year. So if that a survey was done for a specific group of individuals or project, a year ago, you can possibly use that for your application. But again, I guess if there are questions about that, please contact me. Water and sewer is a little bit different. It's still a 3-year period, but based on the quarter that you submit an application, and I had this updated earlier when we were planning to do our application workshop in April. But for the first 2 quarters, you can use the prior 3 calendar years for a survey. So 2020, 19 or 18 would have been allowed for January 1 and April 1 applications. Beginning with the July 1 application date, surveys will have to be conducted either this year or the 2 prior years, 2020 or 2019. So for quarters 3 and 4, your survey timeline is either from 2019 up through the present. The guidance for survey process. This is the HUD CPD notice that outlines the whole process. So if you're interested in reading that, you have access to that at that link. Just some reminders for conducting a survey. The number of households required for the sample. If you're doing a sample survey, there are certain restrictions, or I guess requirements on how many have to be in that sample. The sample size calculator is what's used to determine that, and you plug in the information there, and I've got a slide here in a little bit that shows what that page looks like when you pull that up. But based on the numbers you plug in, it'll tell you how many households you have to survey out of your total universe of households in the community. The survey process now requires 100% response rate. So say you have to survey 200 households, you have to have a 100% response rate from that in order to be considered a valid survey. One thing we also kind of look at too is the LMI survey. If you do a survey and get a different percentage because you don't qualify based on the HUD census data, if there's a huge discrepancy in those numbers, we may look at that a little more, or look for some more clarification to see if something's changed within the community that's created that. Just so that if the HUD ACS data shows a LMI of 30%, and you come in with a survey that's 70%, those are just some red flags that we will want to maybe get some further information on. So conducting an income survey to determine the number of households. As I mentioned earlier, you'll use the sample size calculator link. You'll set the confidence level when you pull that up. That'll be at 95%. Then set the confidence interval to 4. And that will then tell you the number of households that you are required to survey. And again, you need a 100% response rate from that. You can use replacement households if after several attempts you aren't able to contact or get a hold of a household. You can replace them, by randomly selecting another household for that. Most sample sizes are going to be smaller than 500. That 3,000, if you have 3,000 households and say you're doing a community-wide survey, 500 is kind of the threshold. So any survey will generally not have to be more than 500 households in order to consider it to be valid. So, but again, we don't usually run into that because their communities are most of the time smaller and don't have that many households. So, as I mentioned, here's the page for the sample size calculator. And again, if you look where the black arrow is, that's where you'd set the confidence interval at 4, plug in your number of households. Where it says population, that's the actual number of households you have in the community. So if there were 469 households, it's going to calculate that your sample size needs to be 264. And so that's how many randomly selected households out of your total you would have to have for a valid survey. All right. The survey sample, again, has to be selected randomly. You can use a utility billing list and go down that list and select, say, depending on how many households you need, you can select every other one or every third, or you can use a random numbers generator to come up with those random households within your total list. But it does have to be selected randomly so that every household has an equal opportunity to be selected for the survey process. Keep in mind that group quarters are not considered households, so you can't survey dormitories or jails, care facilities. They would not be considered a household for the purposes of survey. If you have any questions about sampling, prior to completing the survey, please contact me. And again, we can talk through that to make sure that we're on the same page, so you don't do a survey and then end up, we find out that it didn't meet the requirements and would have to be redone. Because nobody likes to do rework. So anytime you do have questions, please contact me. The acceptable survey methods are listed here. Normally house to house or door to door. That's generally the best way to get the information you need. Telephone surveys are fine. Mail out surveys and picking the back up is another acceptable method. That usually those are the 3 primary ways of getting the best responses, or making sure that you can get everyone contacted. Some unacceptable or unusable methods, generally mail out and mail in surveys have a low response rate. And so you may have to end up going back out door to door and collecting or getting the information from those who don't send it back in. So, you just kind of keep that in mind, that getting 100% response, you may have a little more work with, a process like that. So, but again, if you can get all of them, that's fine. It's just not the best way to do it. Third-party estimates of household income are unacceptable. You can't just say, well, we know where these people work and therefore we know what their income levels are. So we can't do that. Can't assume income of certain classes of individuals as well. It's pretty common sense information. The sample survey form doesn't have to be a lot of detail, just kind of a brief explanation of what the survey is, assuring that there's anonymity. People aren't required to put their names on here. as a, doing the survey process, you do have to kind of track and know where the households are from or where they're at and kind of be able to tie a household to a survey if for any reason the survey process has to be recreated or if HUD has questions. But they are not required to sign them and put any personal information on the survey form itself. You should provide the name of a local official or responsible party that if they have questions that they want to call and talk to someone or ask, so that they have that contact. The survey has to have the household size, the income levels, and you can also ask questions about citizen support to find out, engage the community and see how many really support the project. Sometimes that's good information to have so that when we can see that, yeah, the community is really behind this, or, it's not just something that a few people want to get done. If 90% of the community is against it, I mean, that obviously is something that we would want to take a look at. The racial and ethnic data is part of the survey. Generally, if you're looking at a community-wide project, basically you use the information from the census for that. If you're doing neighborhood projects or direct project beneficiary projects, you may then want to put that information and gather that information as part of the survey process, so that you're not having to go out and do work twice again. But asking that at the time you do the survey just takes one more step out of the process. All right. Here are the income levels, and these are what are currently on our website. Just kind of throw this out here to make sure that when you go into that website when you're doing LMI surveys, we're looking at the 80% tab. I think it may come up automatically now when you open that, but just be sure that if you're getting into that to pull income levels for your survey, that you use the 80% tab. Because if you pull the wrong income levels, and we're looking at that as when we're reviewing applications, and they're not the correct levels, that can make the survey invalid, or would most likely make it invalid because the levels aren't correct, and so we don't have a good representation or make sure that we're meeting that LMI national objective. All right, so if you have unavailable persons or non-responses, those are generally going to be classified as non-LMI individuals. So if you're not able to contact a household, as I mentioned earlier, you can do, substitute a household for that household if you've made at least 2 attempts to contact the household, going door to door, or 3 calls if you're using phone surveys. You just have to try more than once to make sure that that household they're not just gone, and try them at different times to see if you can to get them as the original household within the sample. But if not, you can then replace them with another randomly selected household. If you're unable to get the full 100% based on, and you've got to get the application done or the survey completed, basically anything then that's considered a non-response would be considered non-LMI. And so those individuals within those households would all be added to that non-LMI total, which can then affect your LMI percentage. And so if that occurs, when you're doing the survey, there's some room in there to provide some narrative and explanation of that. So, if you have some issues or something like that occurs, make sure you explain that so that we know, if the numbers aren't matching up in the survey form tabulation sheet, that we can at least document why that is. Vacant lots and abandoned homes should be excluded from the sample because they really don't have any effect then on the outcome of the survey. So again, sorry if I'm rushing through this. I'm just trying to make sure we get through as much of it as I can if you have to leave. So again, racial and ethnic data, it's good to collect that as part of the survey process so that you're not having to go back after the fact. This is what's included on the survey form or should be put in there with the racial and ethnic groups. And then also whether or not they have have Hispanic origin. We need that documentation as well. The tabulation, that form is in the application itself. You just basically you need to make sure you maintain all of your information related to the survey. That's the big key, I guess, in all of this is to maintain the actual survey instrument that you use. That part you would upload into the application as well. But keeping all that information together, so that if we have to check things, or if HUD wants to check things, or we need to verify information at the time of monitoring, that's all there for us to look at. I think that kind of hits on the second bullet point too. As I mentioned earlier, there may be a resurvey for some projects. Again, if they're community facilities funded projects, this is where that generally occurs because the change in potential or the potential change in the users. And so we just have to do that survey on the back end to make sure that we're still meeting that national objective. This is the tabulation form from the application. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. It's just basically providing that information. And I think it generally will calculate for you when you plug in the numbers. So the LMI percentage, this is the one based on the HUD census data. So again, even though you may do an income survey, we want you to plug that number in there again, so we can just kind of compare and make sure there's not a huge discrepancy between the two. The month and year the survey is conducted, just so we can make sure that it's still within that time frame allowed. Percent of households responding has to be 100%. Total persons in the project area. I mean, generally you're going to use the certified population for the community. No estimates. It has to be the official census number. Or if you're using, if you're doing a targeted income survey for a group within or a targeted area within the community, that number could be different, but that's what we'd be looking there for the total persons in a project like that. This is the survey form, as I mentioned, on the back end, and there is a little bit more information required as part of this. And again, most of you are probably familiar with this, but it's more than just asking whether or not they're above or below the LMI levels. For this purpose, or for purposes of reporting this to HUD on that back end survey, we have to have documented, where they're at in that range. If they're, 30%, 60%, 50%, 60%, or 80%. So there is a little bit more detail involved with that back end survey. All right, so to summarize, obviously all surveys have to be completed prior to the application. You'll use that sample size calculator to determine your sample size. If you're having any issues with that, let me know. All households have to have an equal chance of being surveyed. So again, you want to make sure that you're randomly selecting that from whatever list you may have. Maintain all the information for your files so that we have access to that, or HUD would if there's a need during the monitoring process. And surveys would have to be available for review at monitoring. So be sure to maintain all of those and keep those original surveys on file at City Hall, or if whoever's going to be responsible for that. But you do have to maintain that information, for that 5-year period. If the project's funded, you'll have to maintain that just like you do all of the other contract and project file documents. So and finally, if you have questions about any part of the survey methodology, please contact me or another project manager, and we'd be glad to talk you through the process and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
I got a couple questions, Dan.
Okay.
Is that somebody else in the background? Okay, so the question is, since the community facilities application period is open, Is there an opportunity for EDA to provide comments and the application be resubmitted during the same application window? I think the answer to that is yes, but the resubmitted date is now the active date of the application. So if you, let's say if you're missing a couple of required documents or something, you've just postponed your submittal date, and since it is first come first serve, that may impact the timeliness of awards for that project. Correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, if, we'll either award or deny, or, the application, if, or not award it. And if that's the case, after it's been reviewed, you would just have to go in and, we'd be glad to talk to you about whatever might have been missing or lacking. We generally put that in a letter that goes out that, kind of explains the reason why it wasn't awarded. And, we can talk through those things, but yeah, then you would have to resubmit it. And, depending on what it is, it could be fairly simple. And, you could get the documentation, in a couple of days and turn right around and resubmit it and put you right back in that queue. But we aren't hanging on to them and keeping them open. They're either awarded or not awarded, and then you would have to resubmit.
And another question, is an apartment complex included in an LMI survey?
Yes, they're individual household, individual units. They're all set up individually and separate. We do have surveys, that do include apartments. They're basically, if they're a utility connection, they're going to have an individual address and connection within the city's utility list, if that's what they're using. And so they would all be included in there as part of that random selection because they're individual living units.
And we got a couple more here.
Okay.
What if the landlord pays the utilities for the apartment?
Well, I still think they're considered individual units, even though they may be paid for, and they're individual beneficiaries of that project. So I think we're still going to want to have them surveyed. If you have some specific information or, like that, you want to contact me, we can talk through that and make sure, and I'll verify too if there's anything in the guidelines that address that. But I think our policy has always been in the past and guidance that, those are considered individual households, even if there's only one general meter and they're all paid, they're still considered individual living units and households.
I think that does it for questions.
All right. Well, again, I apologize for going long. Just kind of hard to get through all that in an hour's time, but we aren't too bad. So, but if you have any other questions, be sure to contact Joe or I, and we'll be glad to talk you through whatever. And these things will then again be posted sometime. I think Nicole mentioned maybe later this week, but we should have everything ready to post, and you can go back and listen to some things or whatever if you need to. So.
Okay.
So again, thanks everyone, and if you have questions, let us know.